Final Fantasy pre-release is just days away. Local game stores around the world are going to be hosting pre-release events for players in their community to show up and play with cards from Final Fantasy for the first time ever. Now, long-term viewers of this channel know that pre-release events are some of, if not my very favorite events, one of the most enjoyable things you can do at your local game store, and pre-release is definitely worth it. Pre-release events are a form of sealed tournaments where you receive a pre-release kit containing 6 sealed booster packs of the newest set, as well as 1 promo card. Using this kit and as many basic lands from your local game store's basic lands station as you'd like, you'll build a deck of 40 cards to battle against other players who also built decks out of their pre-release kits. Now, if you've never attended a pre-release event before, never played in a sealed tournament, or maybe it's just been a while since your last pre-release, you can always check out our new player's guide to explaining exactly how to build a sealed deck, which will tell you everything you need to know as an absolute beginner. This is also a great video for if you have a friend who might be coming with you who isn't familiar with what to do at a pre-release. But this video will assume you do know how to build a sealed deck and will instead focus on how best to build a sealed deck for Final Fantasy. I'm going to cover everything you need to know to next level your pre-release experience. I'll cover the set's mechanics, archetypes, and key cards to be aware of when looking through your pool of cards. We're even going to open up a pre-release kit together and build using that sealed pool. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get started. I always recommend organizing your cards by color as you open your packs. You can do this however you like, but I like grouping them in WUBRG order. Or in other words, grouping them by white cards, blue cards, black cards, red cards, and green cards, while also leaving space for artifacts or colorless cards, gold or multicolor cards, and of course any non-basic lands. Next, I recommend separating each color into common and non-common rarities. This will really help you identify the key cards in your pool, from signpost uncommons, which we'll discuss in a moment, to other important indicators at the common and rare level. Doing this is extremely helpful to be able to easily assess your common and non-common cards for each color. Once you have all 6 packs grouped up like this, you can start to get a feel for which cards and colors you might be interested in playing. Looking at this pool, what is your first idea of what to build with it? I've gone ahead and linked the entire pool in this video description. So if you want, you can see every card that we opened and then ask yourself what kind of sealed deck you'd build. At the end of this video, I'll show you what I chose to build, but first I'd like to go over the lessons for Final Fantasy Sealed that led me to that decision. When determining what kind of deck you're going to build, one of the key things you need to understand are the set's mechanics. Understanding a set's mechanics and how strong they are in sealed events like pre-release is going to help you evaluate the power level of your cards and decide which ones will end up in your 40-card deck. Now, there are only 2 new mechanics in Final Fantasy, and actually, both of them are very similar to mechanics that existed previously. I'm going to talk about each of these mechanics for a moment, and then I'll touch briefly on a few of the returning mechanics. The first new mechanic in Final Fantasy is Job Select, an exciting new ability which lets creatures choose and swap between different jobs with unique abilities. This ability appears exclusively on equipment cards and brings a lot to the table. Essentially, when an equipment with Job Select enters the battlefield, you'll create a 1/1 colorless hero creature token and attach the equipment to it. As the game continues, you can move the equipment with Job Select to a different creature. If you move the equipment, the 1/1 hero sticks around. And if the hero dies while attached to the Job Select equipment, the equipment sticks around to be attached to other creatures later. Equipment that makes a creature when it enters is not a new design space for Magic the Gathering. As with previous iterations of this ability, Job Select solves one of the biggest weaknesses of equipment, needing a creature in play in order for them to do anything. You should count each Job Select equipment in your deck toward your total creature count. The second new mechanic in Final Fantasy is like a new take on a modal spell, the tiered mechanic, designed to replicate your spells getting stronger as your character levels up in a Final Fantasy game. Tiered spells have a base mana cost, but offer the ability to pay additional mana to make the spell stronger. There are 3 options for a tiered spell, one that costs 0 additional mana beyond the base cost, and then 2 others that cost more mana in accordance with the increase in the spell's power level. When you cast the tiered spell, you always pick 1 additional cost. You can't pay for multiple tier costs to get multiple abilities like you could for a spree spell in Outlaws of Thunder Junction, despite the visual similarities between spree and tiered. Tiered spells are a great mechanic in Limited, as they scale naturally with the progression of the game as you get more mana and need more juice out of your spells. Saga creatures. For the first time ever in Magic the Gathering, the Final Fantasy set introduces Saga creatures, enchantment creatures that are also sagas. These have all the same properties of both sagas and creatures, meaning they enter with summoning sickness and sacrifice themselves when they hit their maximum lore counter threshold. In practice, saga creatures are very powerful as long as they stick in play, but they won't stick in play long. A 3-chapter saga creature, for instance, only gets to attack once before it sacrifices itself. That said, you can mitigate the downside to sagas to some extent using cards that manipulate the number of lore counters on a saga, of which there are several in this set. Returning mechanics. There are also some returning mechanics such as adventures, flashback, and kicker. All of these mechanics work the same as they did in past iterations, and all 3 mechanics are powerful and limited, as they offer either flexibility, card advantage, or both. Each of the 10 color pairs in Final Fantasy Limited has an associated archetype. Now, some of these archetypes are more clearly defined than others, but decks of any of the 10 color pairs get better the more the cards you include are able to work together. Some cards are absolute bangers in 1 or 2 of its color pairs, but don't play quite as well in the other 2. This is when I like to go through my uncommons that I organized earlier and look for cards that we refer to as signpost uncommons. These are cards that give you a little bit of a clue as to what you can build out of your sealed pool and what archetypes are available to you. These are cards you really want to keep an eye out for and let them have a heavy influence on the deck that you build. Now let's talk about archetypes in Final Fantasy and take a look at some of the signpost cards we want to open in our packs. For the most part, each of the 10 total color pairs also have some overlap with their neighboring color pair. For instance, the red-black color pair is a non-creature spell aggro deck, while the red-blue color pair is more of a big splashy non-creature spell deck. Blue and black, the third color pair in this trio, is a control deck that can borrow from some of the spell-based elements from both red-black and red-blue. That being said, Final Fantasy is very firmly a 2-color set. Unlike the last set, Tarkir Dragonstorm, you should not plan on splashing a 3rd color in your deck. The only exception to this is the Simic Towns archetype, whose town synergies encourage you to run lots of town dual lands that make light splashes of other colors higher on your curve more viable. You also might get away with splashing a 3rd color in the red-green landfall deck, though most often that color will be blue. Every archetype in Final Fantasy has a pair of signpost uncommons, each of which take the form of legendary creatures. These cards tend to be powerful inclusions in your deck, so be sure to look for these uncommons when deciding which colors to build. You don't need signpost uncommons for your deck to be good, but the presence of a few of these gold legends at uncommon in 1 color pair could be the tiebreaker between that pair and another pair that looks similarly powerful but doesn't have any signpost cards. Alright, let's talk about each of the archetypes individually and highlight some of the low rarity cards that you'll want to be sure to include. The white-blue deck is an artifact value deck. Both of its signpost uncommons are pretty potent, but Sid, Timeless Artificer, is especially powerful, as its cycling ability gives you a use for redundant copies of this legendary human artificer. Any card in Azurius colors that references artifacts is going to be a worthy inclusion in your deck, but the best of them is Rock Turret, a passive card selection engine that loves having multiple copies of itself in play. This deck needs a high density of artifacts in order to function. I'd aim for at least half the non-land cards in your deck being artifacts in order to maximize your artifact payoffs. Some of the best artifacts in Azorius are White Auracite, Cargo Ship, and Valkyrie Aerial Unit. All of the Job Select equipment are also excellent inclusions in this deck. If you opened a gold saucer land and you're playing white-blue, you should include the card in your deck, as it's both a means of generating consistent artifact tokens in the form of treasure and can be used to cash in useless artifacts for fresh cards. The blue-black deck is a hard control deck with a pair of powerful signpost uncommons. Lock Coal is a potent attacker that provides card filtration and a life total buffer while being very uncomfortable to block. Ultimessia, Time Sorceress, is a big finisher that doubles as some card selection as well. As with any control deck in Limited, you're going to want plenty of spot removal, card advantage, and big threats that win the game. There are a number of these types in blue-black colors, each of which have their advantages and disadvantages. Make sure you don't neglect the early game, as that's the phase of the game where the blue-black deck is at its weakest. You'll have great late-game cards, but you need low mana value cards to keep up with your opponent's faster starts. The black-red deck is an aggressive, non-creature spell deck that looks to put a lot of 0/1 wizards into play, who each deal your opponent's damage whenever you cast spells. Both its signpost uncommons are very, very good, but Garland is especially powerful, as it is an aggressively statted body that also has significant utility in the late game, coming back as a big flying demon. Every card in your deck should be either a powerful non-creature spell or a creature card that cares about non-creature spells. To that end, Queen Braun is one of the most powerful cards in this archetype, as she generates a horde of wizard tokens if she's left unanswered. Remember, you can cast instants after your opponents declare blocks to trigger prowess and keep her alive through combat. The red-green deck is a landfall beatdown deck. Its signpost uncommons are a pair of legends with landfall abilities. Gladiolus is a huge finisher that turns all your future land drops into pump spells. Rydia offers some passive card selection whenever you play a land, which creates some internal tension because you have to play out your lands to rummage. But rummage effects encourage you to hold your lands to discard for fresh cards. Her second ability mitigates this tension to some extent though, since you can discard sagas instead, which Rydia can then reanimate for value. The foundation of this deck are all the cards that create Chocobo Bird tokens that pump themselves whenever you play lands. The best of these is Chocobo Race Track, which turns each land you play into a bird which will get bigger off of future land drops. The green-white deck is nominally a go-wide aggro deck that builds a board full of creature tokens with the goal of swarming your opponent. That said, only one of the two signpost uncommons, Riona Heartily, actually works directly toward that goal. Garnet is a generically powerful card in her own right, and can give you additional mileage out of your saga creatures, but she looks a little out of place in this archetype. Honestly, I think this archetype is one of the less synergistic ones in general. Cards like Aerith Rescue Mission, Battle Menu, and Chocobo Racetrack are all great cards for the archetype, but I worry that this deck is neither aggressive enough to win quickly, nor grindy enough to win in the late game. The white-black deck is a sacrifice deck that uses both creatures and artifacts as fodder. Judge Magister Gabarinth is a great payoff for this strategy, while Rufus Shinra creates a recursive creature token on attacks that can be used as a sack fodder post-combat. This deck has a ton of grind potential, but it's also capable of hitting hard. It's heavily reliant on opening either Ahriman or Phantom Train, though, as these are the only repeatable sack outlets in the archetype. Namazu Trader will also do in a pinch. White-black is the archetype best at making use of the powerful removal spell Vane's Treachery. Grahatia is also a very strong card in this deck, providing you with a flow of cards to keep your engines running. The black-green deck is a graveyard value deck that looks to put permanent cards in its graveyard specifically. Both of its signpost uncommons encourage this game plan, but Cloud of Darkness is the much better of the two, as it's a flying threat that can remove an opponent's creature on entry if you have a well-stocked yard. Self-mill is critically important to this archetype, as none of its best cards work if your graveyard is empty. Town Greeter is therefore one of green-black's most important enablers. Vanille is also very good at this task. It only mills 2 cards, but it also buys back your most important permanent card from your graveyard on entry. Eden, Seed of the Sanctum, does a similar thing, but its mill is repeatable and it's attached to a utility land, making its inclusion in your deck even more beneficial. As mentioned previously, Simic is a town ramp deck. Its 2 signpost uncommons serve different functions for this goal. Igniscientia is a powerful ramp creature that doubles as some inefficient graveyard hate, while Omega Heartless Evolution is a massive hitter at the top of your curve that effectively locks down an opponent's non-land permanent for several turns while also gaining some life. Some of the other best payoffs for ramping with towns are Travel the Overworld, a phenomenal card draw spell that costs just 2 mana if you control 5 towns, as well as Colosseum Behemoth and Balam T. Rexar, 2 big green dummies with useful enter the battlefield effects. As it often is, the blue-red deck is a non-creature deck. Hey look, it's Is It Spells again, though this time it's slanted towards larger non-creature spells. The 2 signpost uncommons work towards this goal in different ways. The Emperor of Palamisia starts as a mana dork for non-creature spells, but then transforms into a massive beater after it's grown from your big spells. Shantatu, on the other hand, grows temporarily in bursts, and draws you fresh cards if you spend 4 or more mana on your spell. I have some concerns that an archetype revolving around expensive non-creature spells will not be very viable in Limited. That said, there are some big non-creature spells that also generate threats, which will be worth including in your deck. Ring of the Lucy is another good card in this deck, providing a boost to your mana when you need it and tapping down a threatening permanent every turn you don't need the spare mana. Unfortunately, it's legendary. I would recommend steering clear of this archetype during pre-release if you're not an experienced player. Breaking with tradition, the red-white deck is an equipment aggro deck. No wait, that's not breaking with tradition at all. Nonetheless, if you're in red-white, you're in equipment aggro, and one of the bigger signpost uncommons is Giot, King of the Dwarves, who works towards the equipment portion of this game plan, while another signpost uncommon, Zidane, Tantalus Thief, is still a nice top-end card for an aggressive deck. One of the best threats in the deck is Adalbert Steiner, as it's a cheap life linker that gets bigger with each equipment you have in play, even if those equipment aren't attached to Adalbert. Unsurprisingly, the job select equipment are at their absolute best in this archetype. Samurai's Katana is probably the best of these, as it's a 3/3 hasty creature at a baseline and can be used to turn other creatures into hasty threats later in the game. A limited environment is necessarily defined by the quality of its mana fixing. The better a set's mana fixing, the more reliable the decks are capable of being, and the easier it is to splash a third color in your limited deck. In Final Fantasy, the mana fixing is plenty for 2-color decks, but in most cases, this set does not lend itself to 3-color decks, even in a slower environment like pre-release. The only reliable mana fixers that aren't in green are the town dual lands at common, the common land cyclers, and the common artifacts World Map and Blitz Ball. All of these cards are powerful enough to be worth including in your pre-release deck. If you have upwards of 5 or 6 of these fixers, you can lightly splash a third color in your deck if you have some powerful cards worth splashing 4. But unless you're an experienced player, I'd highly recommend you avoid doing this. In green, as usual, it's a slightly different story. Torgal, a fine hound, is an excellent multicolor mana dork at uncommon, while Precious Wanderings and Reach the Horizon are both capable of searching up town dual lands, making them more powerful than your typical land ramp spells in Limited. If you're in green, you might be able to lightly splash a third color, especially if your second color is blue. So, what cards are worth splashing for? Well, let's discuss some of the most powerful cards in this set. These days, a good limited pool is defined first and foremost by the quality of its rares. There are just so many good rares to be had, and the switch to play boosters has made it so you're likely to open more than one rare per pack. Identifying your strongest rares is therefore a key to making a good pre-release deck. In this section, I'm going to talk about a few of my favorite rares in each color, as well as a couple key lower rarity cards in those very colors. 3 of the best rares in white are Venat, Heart to Hadelheim, Minwu, White Mage, and Dion, Bahamut's Dominant. Each of these rares do something very different from one another and ask you to build around a different card type. Legendary cards, knight cards, or cleric cards. But they're each worth building around if you open them. The absolute strongest rare in white, though, is Ultima, a powerful sweeper that also cleans up artifacts and neutralizes any death triggers by ending the turn on resolution. At lower rarities, keep an eye out for Battle Menu and Fate of the Suncrist. Fate of the Suncrist is a functional reprint of a card that's been printed in many sets recently, and is always good. Battle Menu offers more flexibility than most 2-mana spells do in Limited. The best blue rares are the Lunar Whale and Memories Returning, which are both phenomenal card advantage spells in different ways. Memories Returning is the best possible rare to open for the blue-black control deck, though it's also great in the Simic Towns deck and the blue-red Big Spells deck. Summon Leviathan is also a very strong card, but it's held back by only getting to attack once before it dies. Rook Turret is my pick for the best low-rarity card in blue, but most of blue's low-rarity cards are situational role players that only shine in 1 or 2 archetypes. In black, well, Dark Confidant is back, and it's as much of a bomb in this limited format as it is in any other format wherein it's been legal. This is the best high-rarity card in the set, though be careful of your mana curve if you open this guy. The other best rare is Sephiroth, Fabled Soldier, a phenomenal repeatable sack outlet slapped to a blood artist. Oh, and if you ever pop off with death triggers in a single turn, it'll transform into an even more powerful card. Just a phenomenally powerful design. At low rarities, Resentful Revelation is fantastic, as it's great in 3 of the 4 black archetypes: black-red, black-blue, and black-green. It's a non-creature spell, it provides card advantage, and it fills your graveyard. Oh, and it only costs 2 mana for the front half of the card. In red, Clive is a stone-cold bomb, no doubt. This dominant is at its best if you're empty-handed when you play it, but the sky's the limit for how many cards you draw off of its enter the battlefield effect. What's more, when you transform it, it somehow gets even stronger, as the Saga creature side is a huge beater that then comes back as the front side of the card instead of sacrificing itself when it dies. I'm also a big fan of the Fire Crystal, as it both makes your red spells cheaper and creates temporary token copies of your best creatures every turn. At low rarities, Thunder Magic and Fire Magic are both great tiered removal spells. Thunder Magic is the better card, but Fire Magic's utility against the Black Mage token decks, the Chocobo 2/2 bird decks, and the green-white Go Wide deck makes it a main deckable card in this format. In green, Bartson Boko is an absurd payoff for bird-heavy decks, especially those in red-green. Summoner's Grimoire is also a great card for cheating big creatures from your hand into play, much better than this type of card often is in Limited. Jumbo Cactuar is not too difficult to remove or chump block, but if it ever hits your opponent, you'll certainly get a thrill. At low rarities, Town Greeter is the best green common, while Ride the Shoopuff is a phenomenal card for both ramped decks. There are a lot of great multicolor rares and mythics, too many for me to name here. Instead, I want to highlight the 3-color rares and mythics in this set: Choco, Seeker of Paradise; Kefka, Court Mage; Notice, Prince of Lucis; and Sin, Spira's Punishment. All of these cards are very, very strong, and worth splashing for if you're already in 2 of the card's colors. There are several great colorless rares too, the best of which is Buster Sword, but in any deck capable of reaching 9 mana, Summon Bahamut is an absurd bomb for the top of your curve. As you can see, I ended up going with the blue-black control deck. I was guided this direction by the Signpost Uncommon Ultimacia x Sorceress, which we mentioned earlier in this video. As soon as I saw this card, I knew I should examine my pool as a whole to see if blue-black control was a viable option for me. Looking at the pool through this lens, I noticed a handful of pretty nice removal. Black cards like Side Quest, Hunt the Mark, Cornered by Black Mages, and Sephiroth's Interventions slot nicely into what this deck wants to be. I also had available to me some good control cards in blue, such as Stuck in Summoner's Sanctum, Eject, Syncopate, and Ice Flam. After that, I selected my creature spells, spells that fill the board with wizards, spells that help us draw through the deck, and ultimately landed on a pretty powerful top end with the aforementioned Ultimacia, and also the powerful mythic rare Ishtola Rule, who can flicker our Ice Flans, Marlboros, and even Ultimacia herself when needed. But that's just how I would have built this pool. Remember that I have a link to a list of every card opened in this pool in this video's description. And if you go through that list, you might find some other viable options. Maybe you'd have gone for a Boros equipment build, or perhaps Gruul aggro. That's one of the many great things about a sealed pool, is that there are several directions you can build in. It's also why I saved my sealed pool after the event and then rebuild new directions and new decks to play against my friends who do the same. And there you have it, everything you need to know to succeed at your Final Fantasy pre-release. But remember, if you're a brand new player or just someone who hasn't been to a pre-release in a while, you should check out our new player's guide to building a sealed deck. This was recently updated, and it contains everything you need to know to build a 40-card sealed deck from the ground up, which is what you're doing at pre-release. This is also a great video for if you're bringing a friend or you know other new players in need of getting started. And if you'd like to see me play in a pre-release of my own, you can do so on the brand new episode of Shuffle Up and Play, where I sit down to build a 40-card sealed deck alongside Gavin Verhey, Krim, and Numot the Nummy. You can check that video out here or linked in this video's description. And either way, I hope very much this video has been of some help to you and that you have a great time at your local game store's pre-release event. What's up? It's Magic with Boomers, elderly boomers. Today, each of us was told to build Boomer Commander deck, and we don't know what anyone did.
I have a prize card. Whoever wins this will win the prize.
High stakes.
I would have built a different deck!
Let's team up against them. Take these kids to school.
That's right.
But Spice is good at magic and you're not.
Flame Tongue Kavu. Oh, good old fashioned.
There we go. Illusory terrain.
I'm playing Omnath, and I only have access to blue mana.
Commander is supposed to be about having fun with your friends.
I'm having fun! Are you not having fun?
It's like a 7-tiered nacho dip. That's how I build my decks.
Maybe don't be so antagonistic all the time.
I feel like I'm too young for this pod.
Gosh.
I don't get these